So thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is the first webinar in the series of CaBA Biodiversity webinars that we're going to be running over the next few months and beyond. The CaBA Biodiversity Working Group has set up this series of webinars to help catchment practitioners in their delivery of biodiversity projects. So we are one of the working groups that sits under CaBA and its sort of national efforts. And our role is to help catchment deliverers in their biodiversity delivery by doing things like sharing best practice, sharing information about new techniques, ensuring that catchment partnerships and others have access to data to underpin project planning and delivery. And so there are a series of webinars that we're running over the next few months and beyond, where we'll be picking up on various different topics. Today is the first in that series, and in a moment I will hand over to Josh Jones from the Rivers Trust, who's going to be leading us through discussions today about the CaBA Biodiversity Hub. We also have a couple of follow-on webinars planned up to December, looking at different habitat-focused webinar topics, including on lakes, on river restoration and on floodplain meadows. And I will put links to all of those in the chat for anyone who hasn't already seen those. And we are looking to continue the series beyond Christmas as well. So I will also put contact details for myself and for Glenn Cooper at Natural England, who is the chair of the CaBA Biodiversity Working Group, so that if you have any other suggestions on topics that you'd like to see us cover, then please do get in touch and we'll look at whether there's scope to put those on as part of the series. I probably completely failed to introduce myself. So I am Ali Morse, Water Policy Manager at the Wildlife Trusts, and I'm one of the members of the CaBA Biodiversity Group and have been helping to put together this webinar series. So that's really all I wanted to say in terms of an introduction. We will now get started with the webinar. We're going to hand over to Josh, who will run us through the CaBA Biodiversity Hub and the resources that are available for practitioners to use. This will take probably around 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have a bit of time for discussion and questions at the end. Having said that, if you do have questions as we're going through and they're relevant to sort of the thing that's being discussed at that point, then we'll bring you in and you can ask your question so that it's kind of happening at the right time in the proceedings to be relevant to what we're talking about at the time. Any more sort of generic questions I'll try and capture and we'll come to in a discussion session at the end. So please do pop any questions in the chat or raise your hands and we'll bring you in to ask your question. We are going to be recording this for anyone who isn't able to join us, and we'll be sharing the recording via CaBA and via the CaBA website and newsletters and so on. We'll also send the link out to all participants so that if you've got colleagues that you'd like to share this with, then you'll be able to do so afterwards. That is probably it from me by way of introduction, so I will now hand swiftly over to Josh.
Thank you, Ali. Afternoon, everyone. Just share my screen. So good news is that today I haven't got any slides. So everything I'm talking about, fingers crossed, will appear via the magic of the internet. So this is the CaBA Biodiversity Hub. So what is it? So it's a collection of a few story maps, ArcGIS story maps, which describe the CaBA Biodiversity Data Portal, the sorts of national data and evidence we have, some examples of local data and citizen science, and finishes off with some case studies. And I'll see if I can get Liam has this link, and maybe you could share the link to this hub either now in the chat or once I've finished it could be sent around. But you can find this from the CaBA website. If you know where the CaBA website is, if you go to the catchmentbasedapproach.org and you go /hubs, you find it here under the Biodiversity Hub. So the first one is the Biodiversity Data Portal. So we've brought together a load of national layers to basically help practitioners work in different parts of the country. And these have all been extracted from, these are all sorts of things that are important for practitioners working at catchment scale. They'll provide lots of information about the characteristics of biological communities and the ecosystems and habitats and all sorts of flood management and water retention possibilities that exist in catchments and across the country. So within this page, we have talking a bit about the Biodiversity Data Portal. So this is built on the CaBA data package. So this is a collection of layers that we've brought together at the Rivers Trust. Very few of these we've actually made ourselves. They're from government, they're from various other charities and organisations. And there's over 200 spatial layers here, which you can view. If you click on this link, you can view through an online web explorer. This has everything from water company information right down to a few local or very small data sets. And there's a guidance document, and you can have a look at this as an online version. If you really need an offline version, it's possible to get an offline version. But the biodiversity working group have reviewed these more than this large data package, and we've pulled out layers that are more pertinent to addressing biodiversity issues and opportunities in catchments. And this is now the CaBA Biodiversity Data Portal. So it includes over 70 layers. You can look at different layers and overlays in the Data Explorer. There's this StoryMap, which gives you lots of guidance and case studies. And there will be lots of webinars and links popping up on this StoryMap as time goes on. So there's a link here to the Biodiversity Data Portal. So I've already opened it because it does take a while to open. So essentially what you have is you've got a map you can zoom around, and along the bottom are all the different categories of data. So you can look at all of the data, which includes everything that's in this list. You can look at issues and status. So status of SSSIs, WFD information, designated sites, the priority habitat mapping, climate change, natural capital is another one that lots of this is, and you can find out a bit more about it. You can go and see our link to it, and you can read a bit of the description, and there'll be further links. You can bring it into your own GIS if you really need to. And there's a whole host of layers, and I'll go through these in the StoryMap. So this is for anyone to use. So if you don't need a desktop GIS, and once you've populated your map with, say, you're interested in SSSIs and you want to know where there's say natural capital, you can overlay those, and if you're interested in this area, you can you should be able to export it. Yeah, of course, you can add your own local data. You can change the base maps as well. And there's the export button I've forgotten. No, my mistake. Sorry, you can't export from here. But what you'll get is this basically allows you to view all of this national data. So you can then start to think about places where you might need to improve data. Going back to the StoryMap. So there's the biodiversity data pack that I've just shown you a few of the layers on. The pack aims to provide ecological explanation of why natural ecosystem function is important, and help us set out specific management messages to help guide decision making within catchments. So anyone delivering biodiversity opportunities and improvements in catchments. This is who it's aimed at: land managers and anyone else who might be doing anything related to what we're talking about today. There's the link here, and there's more information on. There's lots of links throughout with lots of guidance. We also have a few details here on the who the working group are, what some of their aims are in terms of highlighting opportunities and helping out catchment management to utilise biodiversity data and sharing expertise, as Ali mentioned. There's some of the people who are involved, and you've got contacts with Glenn and Ali and myself. Particularly if you notice something that's broken on this page, please send me an email, whether it's a link or a bit of data has been updated. We are always updating our websites and maps at the Rivers Trust. So the first page, so you've got your pages along, your extra pages on the top, is the national data and evidence. So these are the layers that are available in the Explorer. So you can see along the top all of the different categories that are available, and if your screen is slightly wider, you don't have this arrow. So the first one is current status. So the first thing you see is SSI condition. This map, by the way, is showing all the data, but it's just by default over Cumbria. And you get your legend, and you also get pop-ups when you click on the polygons, and you find out more information by following links. We also have WFD status that everyone is probably familiar with if they work in the catchment context. And then you can also swap between the overall status, the ecological status, and then the chemical status, which is never a nice picture to look at. Another summary of the current status of particularly freshwater habitats and indeed other freshwater habitats is Natural England's B6, I think B6 indicator. So this is, they've taken information from all of the different habitats across the country, and they've kind of assessed their condition, and it's been laid out in non-spatial scale, but you can look at that in more detail. And I think they're still working on that for freshwater. So yeah, so they're still producing progress reports. In fact, I've been consulting on some other bits of it. So this will be updated when there's more information on that. So after the current status, you can have a look at all the different habitat network mapping we have available. And this is locations of the, if it ever loads up, of the 18 priority habitats, which have been selected to form the habitat networks. So this is really good for working out where there is habitat, where there might be gaps that you can join up. And there's plenty of different habitat networks in the data catalogue in the Explorer that I've just mentioned. And again, there's plenty of guidance documents for all of the data on this story map. Don't know why that's not loading up. Maybe my internet's not very strong. We also have priority freshwater habitats. The priority habitats part of the UK's commitment to the International Convention on Biodiversity. So these were designated based on the good chemical status, the natural morphology, hydrology, and the biological assemblage found in those habitats. But it's also based on partial data sets derived from WFD. So it does miss some smaller water bodies. And this data layer was in part created, was created by through the priority habitats portal. So this is one of the first examples of this portal, which pops up a few times, where you can contribute additional data to improve these maps. And so we can constantly refine them. Yeah. Okay. No, another map that's not loading. So this one is so this is the Wetland Vision. This is looking at freshwater habitats can be found across urban and rural landscapes, but it's not available outside of just what you can see here. You can get some PDF maps, but because of third-party licensing and its resolution, it's not recommended to be used at a greater at a detailed scale. But you can at least have a scroll around it online if you're interested. There's also plenty of data on river and stream habitats. Again, these are the priority ones of those that have been designated due to a high degree of naturalness. And streams as well are those designated with a catchment upstream catchment area of less than 10 kilometers squared. So you can see where priority streams have been mapped in orange and where priority rivers have been mapped in blue. Again, this comes from the this is based on Natural England data, but it is now being refined by stakeholders through the priority habitats portal that I mentioned only a minute ago. And you can contribute more data here if you've not used the priority habitats portal before. The mapping of these UK BAP designated habitats is ongoing. So new maps are incoming at a UK level based on a modelling exercise under the Habitats Directive. We've also got a very small amount of river and stream restoration priorities. So these are places which have already been identified as nearly being good enough to meet the priority habitat, but they are missing a natural habitat function in terms of their hydrology or the physical aspects, chemical or any biological aspects. So these are places that can also be added to through the priority habitat data portal. So if you know of any places that need some extra restoration and it's worth documenting them, this priority habitat data portal is a one-stop shop for making sure those places end up on a map so they can be used by potentially more or by other people and lots of other stakeholders within a catchment. So then we have lakes and ponds, and so there we have lakes are generally bodies of water that are greater than 2 hectares, and ponds are smaller than 2 hectares. Work to map these priority habitat definitions is ongoing to identify the priority habitats within the ones that have been mapped. There's ongoing work to refine this. So there is a map that should come up of, if you just imagine a map here of lake and stream, lake and pond priorities. So very much like the river priority map. Here we are. It loads up. So this is still being constructed. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that. So again, you can submit information through the priority habitat data portal. So this layer actually gets populated and it starts the ball rolling in terms of places where we can start doing some work in these areas, or at least let other people know that there's work going on. And there's also the CEH UK Lakes portal, which has over 40,000 lakes. And there's plenty of information here just in terms of their water body identifier under WFD. And again, there's a bit more information in terms of guidance. Ponds, however, it's something that have been mapped much more widely. So ponds have been mapped whether they're inside Ordnance Survey maps or they're near Ordnance Survey ponds, and you can see they're categorised here in the legend. But there's plenty here, and they're always, again, always looking for more through the Priority Habitat portal. And this actually was, this has been put together by the Freshwater Habitats Trust. So there's plenty of links here with them. And if you want to find any more, there's an additional story map, that CaBA story map for lakes, are they cherished yet forgotten? And some other links to plenty more guidance in terms of produced by the working group for lakes and for ponds. We also have some data on wetlands and wet grassland and floodplains. So here's some data. This is from the Floodplain Meadows Partnership. This is from their meadow map. So they've got a few points on existing floodplain meadows and places where floodplain meadow restoration is ongoing. So you can contribute more sites here through their definition, through their website using their definitions. There's also the Environment Agency's working with natural processes data. Some of that is shown here in terms of for floodplain reconnection in places where there's opportunities for floodplain reconnection. And with a lot of these layers, because they are at a national scale, the advice generally is that these are indicators of where it might be good to go and do some scoping work. So I'm sure most of you are aware that maps aren't always de facto, so sometimes it's worth going to look at goes to the riverbank itself and determine whether it's such a suitable site for floodplain reconnection. There's a bit of data on the freshwater land classification. So this is land covers that feed into watercourses, so you get an idea of what the substrate is. So what the likely sources of soil parent material and soil hydrology are to be, and using some more information what that might mean for your streams and what condition they should be in. And there's plenty of guidance there. The floodplain wetland mosaic is a new priority habitat definition. They're not very well described. Currently they sit under the coastal floodplain grazing marsh, but they don't quite fit that definition very well. So this data again is new and is incoming. So look out for this when it arrives. And then on bogs and fens, more data on where water can be held up in wet soils and peaty soils. So there's the peat layer from Natural England 2008. With there's a few definitions of peat here, and that is partly based, on the BGS data and the Cranfield's National Soils Map. But there is data there, I promise. I just live in the countryside and I don't have very good internet sometimes. There's also data on the priority habitat inventory. So if I maybe turn my camera off, maybe that will improve our chances of seeing players, who knows. There's the priority habitat inventory data as well, which will show you the distribution of bog and fen habitats. And it's possible, if it's going to load up, here we are. to use these controls on the left to turn on different layers, so you can see where there's lowland fen or where there's lowland rose bog, and there's the legend as well. And there's the priority peat habitat eventually loading up. So this is all the same data that is on the Data Explorer. There's just a bit of narrative with it. So if you need a bit of quick explanation, but there's also these habitat guides and plenty of detailed information on the CaBA website. There's a bit of information also on wet woodland, and particularly alder and willow and birch, and some of the habitats and species they might support can be seen where they might be in this map. So this is a native woodland model. So in here are, based on the climatic conditions, the topography and and a few other factors, this is a modelled map of what forests you should expect in these areas. But again, it's only should be used at a very coarse resolution. If you're interested in potentially planting some more woodland, there's another. Oh, this is another good one for planting woodland. There's the floodplain and riparian woodland layer. This is part of the Environment Agency's working with natural processes data. So they've classified woodland as whether it's in a flood zone or whether it's within 50 metres of the watercourse. Which is why it was originally focused on Wales. When you zoom in, you can see the detail and you can get the information on the area. So this in combination with things like the soilscape data might give you an idea of where you can intercept runoff from various soil types through tree planting, and also places where you can do some. This is where you can't plant trees. So the EA have, part of their working with natural processes, have also got constraints information, and this kind of tells you, well, perhaps there's no tree planting that should happen on peat. You're not going to plant any trees in water bodies, places where there's already woodland. So before you spend lots of money and time doing some sort of suitability analysis for tree planting, you can have a quick look at some of the EA's constraints. And this was used in a case study, which I'll just flick through right at the end, in keeping our rivers cool on the Tester niching. And there's also plenty of guidance here on wet woodland. And there's another data set which should appeared, or might appear later, which I will mention for this tree planting. So then coastal habitats, mainly salt marshes. This is terrestrial coastal habitats we're talking about that are at risk from storm surges and sea level rise. This layer is quite new, so there is, when data loads up, yeah, there's not very much. However, you can look at salt mass extent and zonation, and you can also look at change. So when it loads, you can see that through a time series comparison. This data will show you where there's been either growth or retreat of salt marshes. Trust me, it is there, but maybe you've got some faster internet than I have. There we are. And there's also places where there's managed realignment and regulated tidal exchange as part of restoration that's ongoing. through the Marine Management Organisation. So again, there's more information on their website, and they've got lots of there's creating a database on habitat creation. So existing schemes, including, I do apologise to the internet. And again, there's more guidance. There's all of these layers. There is always plenty of guidance if you've never worked with coastal habitats or any other sort of any of these layers before. That kind of wraps up. I know there's the last one is I've forgotten seagrass meadows. So again, not necessarily terrestrial, and there's not always very many of these around the UK, but where there is data, that's available here on through the Data Explorer and on the StoryMap, and there's plenty of guidance. And a small bit about native oyster beds. So this is potential for native oyster bed areas, and there's historical sites, and there's also, you can find there are some native oyster locations, and then there's also in the blue there's potential areas. But again, this is kind of a national scale, so it's always worth doing some more detailed investigation when it comes to it. There's also, if you're interested in more coastal data, there is a coastal data package in Explorer. So if you go to the CaBA website and you go to hubs, you can access that from there. And there's plenty of guidance. So then it tells you what to do once you got to the bottom. So speaking of not just using the national data and evidence to run your local scale study or your restoration work, there's some good examples here of local data, which is fundamental to helping you get into the real detail of whether something will work, whether it won't work, and where the opportunities lie at a much more finer spatial scale. So locally, local authorities, some of you may have worked with or helped to define local wildlife sites. So these aren't always mapped nationally. Locally important species through local authorities and local environmental record centres. And the Freshwater Habitats Trust have also developed a method for identifying some of these important freshwater areas, which is available. And there's lots of biodiversity opportunity mapping, and then other, more local planning development information that is always worth incorporating local data to refine what you've learned from looking at the national data. And then on top of that, there's always the opportunity to use some well thought out citizen science approaches. So there's a few that already exist, and one or two of them are quite successful. So one of those is the Riverfly monitoring initiative. So some of this information has been used in successful court appeals. Somewhere in the south, near the south coast, and if I'm right, so this sort of data is taken seriously by the regulators and courts. So it can sometimes be useful to mobilise engaged citizens, particularly in stuff around finding pollution sources. There's also the Modular River Survey. There's a ton of data here. Again, all collected by from citizen scientists right up to professionals. And there's a link here. This isn't an actual map. This is their map. But you get exactly the same sort of information when you go on their website. And there's also all the method guidance as well there, should you wish to do some yourself or organise others to do it. And then through the priority habitat portal, there's information on how to do naturalness assessments, particularly around small streams and lakes. And this is aimed at everyone, again, so not just professionals like some of the people on this call, but also citizen scientists. And then there's also the Freshwater Watch, so sometimes considered an even more truly citizen science-led approach, where they essentially just give out the method and let people go and do it wherever they like. But it's part of Earthwatch Europe, and it's really simple, and there's a huge amount of information and resources available on their website. There's also the INS mapper, which draws data from iRecord and the NBN Atlas, and also don't forget your local record centres. But there's if you want plenty of citizen science gathered data on invasive species, which sometimes depends, which is often quite good, because many of our invasive species in the UK are plants, and plant recorders in the UK are some of the most dedicated I've found from previous work. There's also an app that we have built in collaboration with Zoological Society of London and the Environment Agency. And this is for mapping river obstacles, so weirs, dams, sluices. So there's already a lot of over 30,000 records on this map of data that the agencies know about, but we know the location of less than half of these structures. So this is a really good way of getting people to fill in the gaps, particularly where they live, because they'll zoom in on the map and go, oh, I know there's a weir here, but it's not on the map, and they'll go and take a picture of it. And that data gets used directly by the Environment Agency when planning their fish passage prioritisation at a national scale. There's also Outfall Safari, so another app particularly relevant with all of the information about raw sewage being pumped into rivers. There's an opportunity here for citizen scientists to go out and record CSOs and where they think there's misconnections, and there's plenty of information here should that be something of interest. And it's really important to remember that actually when people are organised and sometimes have a small bit of training, that they're motivated, their data is as good as data collected by trained professionals. It just needs to be targeted properly. So there's all sorts of information again for citizen science monitoring. And my last slide, if you will, is just some case studies. So this is where CaBA partnerships have used data and shared data and evidence to support deliveries and biodiversity outcomes in freshwater and wetland habitats. And please get in touch if you have any examples where you've spotted some gaps on the map or some opportunities based on the layers available, and then you've used that to catapult your own investigations and restoration. We'd love to post more examples here. But one of them is the Freshwater Habitats Trust, who identified important freshwater areas, places that act as sinks for biodiversity and sources. There's a really good webinar here, I think one I watched last year, on how they've used the data, and they've also published a method on how these can be identified and kind of prioritised in terms of their conservation status and what sorts of priorities are relevant. And the other example is from Keeping Rivers Cool, from the tested itching, and this used some of the constraints data I mentioned earlier, but there's also a layer which I didn't get to tell you about, but it's definitely in here. And the layers are, and that is the Riparian shade data, which tells designated sites. There was opportunities. I can get it, it's a good example. Here we are. Riparian shades. Some of you might be familiar with this, and there should be. There seems to have been a section of the StoryMap I've missed, and that explains this. This is using LiDAR data, which is essentially using a laser to estimate vegetation height or even ground height, and this has been used to identify areas, bits of river which are not shaded, so places which will be exposed to increased temperatures and with more sunlight. So this is one of the layers used by the test and itching to identify areas where they could plant trees so it would benefit river cooling. So those are so that's the CaBA Biodiversity Hub. That's the Data Explorer. I hope some of that's been useful. Please let me know if you've got any questions.
Thank you, Josh, for that run through. So hopefully, as everyone has seen, there's quite a lot in there altogether, and it's definitely worth going away and having a play with it and seeing what's there. We did have a couple of questions come through on the chat. I thought I would save these to the end because some of them were a bit more sort of overarching. The first one, which was when we were talking around the various habitat layers, was a question from Liz asking, do we map habitats that are at risk, for example, from development? I'm not aware of any layers that cover that kind of thing, particularly development, partly because most of the layers in the data package are things that are available on a national scale. And I think something like development risk would be very heavily influenced by things like local authority development plans. So they'd perhaps be more that local data. Within the CaBA data package and the sort of guidance manual that sits alongside it, there are potential data layers identified where there might not be something available at national scale, but it might be something that's available locally. And some of those things include things like local authority biodiversity opportunity mapping. So I would think, and Josh might have other sort of thoughts to build on that, but I would think that might be something that we don't necessarily have at a national level, but might be available more locally.
Yeah, so I've done some local wildlife site mapping at a local scale before. Yeah, that's entirely, that sort of development certainly is something that is only mapped locally, or at least was only available locally. The layers, the group of layers that are available in this data package are the issues and status. So if that's the closest you'll get at the moment. It's mainly around triple SIs and other designated sites and WFD status, but no, without going to maybe data.gov and looking for additional data that you could overlay, there's nothing in the package at the moment that speaks of risks at a local scale, certainly.
I'm not sure if we covered this earlier. Apologies if I missed it because I was faffing with controls. But one of the buttons that's available on the Data Explorer, you might have spotted, is a button to add local data. So where you pull through your national data layers, if you've then got some local information that you want to sort of add to that picture, you can import your own local data as well in order to sort of compare things side by side and make maps and so on. So that might be a function that would be useful where you do have that additional information on development threats and so on. Another question that came through was from Tanya, who asked, do we also have kelp when we were talking about the, we were in the section with the sort of estuarine and seagrass layers and so on. And I think you've probably answered this in that in the Biodiversity Hub, we're primarily focused on the terrestrial kind of down to the coast, and then there's the separate coastal data explorer. So I don't know if that's one of the layers that is available through the coastal explorer. Do you happen to know that, Josh?
I've just got it open. I haven't looked through it through the coastal hub, but if you go to catchment-based-approach.org and then go to hubs, you'll find the coastal data explorer, and you can have a look there in at your own leisure. I think there is one, but I cannot remember exactly. There should be a guidance document as well for that. So if you wanted to just do a quick search by keyword, you could maybe use that as well.
And then the final question that I think I've seen was from Liz asking, with regards to the citizen science side of things, is there much on habitat? So I think she asked that just before you came to talking about the modular river surveys, which look at the sort of physical characteristics and other aspects of river habitats, and then the naturalness assessment on priority habitats. So that one covers rivers and lakes, and there are, I think, two elements to that. One is looking at the naturalness, so how sort of impacted or not are those watercourses and those water bodies by human modification, and then the element that sort of sits alongside that is opportunity for restoration. So that sort of piece of citizen science looks at those two aspects. I'm not sure, we did sort of pick out for this hub those that we thought were most relevant to biodiversity delivery, so we're not saying it's a sort of exhaustive list. And as Josh was scrolling through the page, and there were a series of sort of guidance documents towards the bottom of that page, the one that I think was at the top of that list was the CaBA Citizen Science Manual. So that has more information about a range of other citizen science initiatives as well. So that would be worth a look for any wider habitat focused citizen science opportunities.
There's also some reason I missed a section on the StoryMap. There's the river habitat survey. So this is very extensive survey method that's been used everywhere. And I think this is open either to professionals or maybe the wider public, but there's definitely a method here which you could adapt and submit your own data to supplement. This will tell you about if it's been modified or what the quality of the habitat is. That answers your question.
So I think that brings us to the end of the questions that are in the chat so far. If anyone else has anything they would like to ask, do please raise your hand or pop a message in the chat. And I suppose one quick thing that I wanted to ask whilst we're waiting to see if anyone else has got anything they'd like to ask us is around the opportunities to sort of link up on this kind of area of work with local nature recovery strategies. And I know that's something that CaBA have been working on centrally. Is it something that you could say a few words on, Josh?
Unfortunately not. I'm quite new to this role. Some of you might remember Lucy, who was in these shoes until maybe less than a month ago. But now I've taken on this part of her job. So right now I'm a bit green.
No problem. Sorry to put you on the spot with that
That's
one.
right.
I think I will do my best to kind of answer my own question in that case, which is around the sort of role that catchment plans can play in local nature recovery strategies. So local authorities or other relevant bodies will be developing local nature recovery strategies under a sort of power and an opportunity that came forward through the Environment Act. And there is a really good opportunity to feed in catchment partnership plans that set out sort of aspirations for the water environment and have these become a key component of local nature recovery strategies. And where those plans are really quite sort of broad and cover a whole element of biodiversity delivery, they will be very, much more easily incorporated across into those local nature recovery strategies. And so the Biodiversity Hub and all the resources that we've run through today will hopefully be really useful in either helping catchment partnerships to sort of formulate their catchment plans where those aren't already sort of up and running, or in kind of supplementing them with wider biodiversity delivery, or for those local authority and other partners that are working on the strategies themselves. A question from Gary in the chat is, can we link in with Welsh or Scottish data for catchments that cross borders? And this will be needed for some local nature recovery strategies. Josh, can you say something about the kind of cross-border element of our data provision? Yeah, so at the moment, certainly at a Rivers Trust level, Afonydd Cymru are fiercely independent, but it is possible to include data from cross-border catchments, as long as it exists on the Welsh side, because not all of the layers calculated in England. For instance, a lot of the Environment Agency working with natural processes layers will be clipped to England. So if there is appetite for it, and our Welsh partners are happy to tag along, and I'm sure we can work that through the CaBA partnership, then we can include data on the other side of the border, but it's just down to availability. Thank you for that. And a couple of questions from Liz in the chat. I'll take the easy one first, which is, will you make this very useful webinar available? Yes, we have been recording the session today. We'll send a link out to all participants so that you have it and can share it with colleagues, and we'll also share it through the CaBA newsletter for wider practitioners as well. On your first question, can CaBA help directly with CS organisations, and who should be contacted? Does that, Liz, would you like to come in on this? Does that refer to countryside stewardship, or are you thinking of another CS acronym that I might not be familiar with? Citizen science. Ah, SC. I'm afraid I'm still not clear on that one. Ah, citizen science, got you. Okay. Yes, I think within the examples that Josh ran through, there were some links to organisations who have sort of developed or helped deliver some of those initiatives that were discussed, such as the Riverfly partnership for Riverfly surveys. And with wider bits and pieces, I think that I'm right in saying that there are links through or contact details to relevant organisations within that citizen science manual that's available on the CaBA website, or through one of the links that was on the page that Josh showed. Excellent.
Yeah, there's on the CaBA website, there's a whole section about citizen science and volunteer monitoring, and there's plenty of content information, guides and links to get started.
Brilliant. That more or less brings us up to time. I thought I spotted a hand up earlier and I cannot see it now. If anyone has a question that they did want to ask that we haven't covered, we have probably another 30 seconds or so available if you would like to. Do please make yourselves known. And if not, if we've covered all of your questions for now, we will draw the webinar to a close. So one of the things that I was going to do, if I can find the right document, is that I have a series of links to the upcoming webinars taking place in October, November and December. So I am just going to pop those in the chat. Oh, they might come through as a bit of a muddle, but hopefully they will all make sense. Yeah, that looks better. So we have natural function restoration in rivers, including looking at stage 0 restoration on the 5th of October. We have the restoration of lakes and their catchments on the 9th of November. And we have the restoration of floodplain meadows on the 7th of December. And as I said, I've popped details for myself and for Glenn Cooper, who's the chair of the group, in the chat. And if you have ideas about future topics that you'd like to see us cover, do please get in touch. And I've just spotted the reply from Bethany, who says she's leading for the Environment Agency on the water-related spatial data that will go into the local nature recovery strategy data portal that DEFRA will be providing to support development of those strategies. What's available in this portal will complement all of that. So that's brilliant. Thanks for that, Bethany. I think that probably brings us to an end for today. So thank you very much to Josh for running us through all of that today. As I said, a lot to get through, and this was just a kind of brief intro, so definitely worth going away and having a look at those sites yourselves in more detail. And we have popped at the very beginning of the chat links to the Data Hub and the Data Explorer, so you can go and have a play. We have the remaining webinars coming up until December, and then welcome suggestions for further topics beyond that. Final thanks goes to all of you for joining us this afternoon. I will close us down at this point. Thank you very much all, and hopefully see you all